All right, I'd like to welcome everyone to our monthly Spark Talk, where this month we're talking about developing effective GenAI course policies. As a reminder, my name is Lisa Blue, and I am the Director of Artificial Intelligence Strategies here at Eastern Kentucky University. Through the Spark Talks, I hope to demystify generative AI while sparking conversations that inspire innovative teaching and learning strategies in higher education. I'm very glad you're here today. Each month, I'll share insights and practical strategies for integrating GenAI into your teaching, research, and scholarship. My goal is to enrich your teaching methods, empower our students, and promote the ethical use of AI while preparing students for the tech-driven job market they'll face post-graduation. I'm joined today by Dan Royalty, Assistant Director of Student Conduct and Community Standards. So Dan, would you like to get us started today?
Absolutely, Lisa. Hello, everybody. As Lisa said, I am Dan. I serve as Assistant Director at EKU of Student Conduct and Community Standards, and a large part is academic integrity. So welcome. As we begin our discussion, I want to start by making an important distinction between policies and guidelines. I think this distinction will help us throughout this whole talk. When we talk about policies, we're talking about dealing with formal, mandatory rules that carry real consequences. Let's think of our existing academic integrity policy here at EKU. I mean, it's pretty clear, pretty specific, and we have in it detailed the repercussions of being caught committing academic dishonesty. So, for instance, a policy could say AI use of or all use of AI tools must be explicitly disclosed in submitted work. Guidelines serve a different purpose. Instead of being a map, they're more like a compass to shepherd and urge people into the right direction. And it allows flexibility, but also judgment on actions. So a guideline could be consider using AI tools for brainstorming or initial drafts. So I think the choice between implementing a policy versus a guideline, it really reflects your pedagogical philosophy and your goals within the classroom. Policy should signal what's non-negotiable for maintaining academic integrity and fairness. But the guidelines acknowledge that we're all navigating new territory and that we're all learning together while we're using these tools in a multiple number of ways.
And as an additional sign to that, I would offer to you all that as the Director of Artificial Intelligence Strategies and a staff member here at EKU that is not currently teaching, what I offer to you today and what I offer to my faculty are guidelines that they can either choose to indoctrinate into their syllabus in their classrooms as a policy, and potentially faculty may choose to incorporate some of my guidelines as institutional policies. So policy can be either at the institution or the instructor level.
And now we're going to do a brief poll regarding prohibition and policy within your own classrooms and institutions. So for the first question, to what extent are you prohibiting or encouraging student use of generative artificial intelligence in your courses? And you will have a number of things to select from. Whereas number two, which statement best describes your current approach to developing and implementing a policy for student use of generative AI in your courses?
I've also included these questions as part of our digital swag bag in case you're curious about starting these conversations at your own institutions. And so I felt like these options kind of covered the entire spectrum of where people might be with both AI implementation in their courses and with policy development. And just realize that this is truly a judgment-free zone. If you have chosen to go with absolutely no AI in your classroom at present, that makes total sense, and we want to support you in that decision. If you're starting to dip your toe in the water though and figure out how to incorporate AI thoughtfully into your assessments, we're here to support that as well. All right, so we've got about 73% participation. I'm gonna leave this open for just a few more seconds. All right, closing the poll in 3, 2, and 1. All right, and so sharing the results here. Pull this over, we can see that. To what extent are you prohibiting or encouraging student use of GenAI in your courses? We've got about 6% with strict prohibition, 9% with mostly prohibiting, 38% are starting to ease into using GenAI with specific guidelines or restrictions, and a little bit lower percentage is encouraging student use of GenAI for assignments where it enhances learning with specific guidelines. I think that's a great place to be with those educational guardrails. I promote student use of GenAI in many assignments as a tool for learning and creativity with some guidelines, and 3% of you are all in with fully embracing the use of GenAI in almost every assignment with minimal restrictions. For our second poll question, which statement best describes your current approach to developing and implementing a policy? We've got 9% that are aware of GenAI but have not considered how it affects their course. That's okay. I am so glad you're here because this is a fantastic first step to learning about GenAI and how it may affect your course and how you may wish to incorporate it in future semesters. We have 24% exploring GenAI and how it might be relevant to courses and students learning. Fantastic. We have 15% experimenting with GenAI. We have 21% developing a policy for use, balancing restrictions with potential benefits. And we have 18% refining GenAI policy based on experience and feedback from students. I love the idea of having that give and take. You know, how did this work for you as students? What can I do to improve? 9% fully integrated GenAI into their courses with clear policies that encourage its use in ways that enhance learning. Bravo to you. And we have one person that's actively advocating for thoughtful integration of GenAI across courses and sharing best practices with colleagues. And that is fantastic. Ultimately, we hope that you can become comfortable enough with generative AI technologies, both in how they show up in the classroom, in tutoring situations that your students independently manage, but also how we create effective course policies to support the best use. All right, so when we're talking about creating AI embracing assessment or adoption of AI technologies into our assignments, there are 3 key strategies that we can adopt to make this transition go more smoothly. We can foster that student's intrinsic motivation, and I've got several bullet points to cover over that. We definitely want to set clear policies and expectations, and this is going to make us have to go back and reflect on some of our academic offense lingo. You know, is cheating still a viable term? What's this over-reliance that we're hearing about? And always offering examples of correct usage. You can't go wrong with that. This technology is so new. We're trying to figure it out. Students are trying to figure it out. And so it only makes sense to say, hey, this is what good practice looks like. This is what a practice looks like that I'd like to discourage. And then promoting this transparency and dialogue, this back and forth with our students. It comes from the basis of an engaged pedagogy, sharing your policy rationale, and teaching students how to document their AI use appropriately. So for that first key strategy, we've really got to appeal to our students and explain to them, why are we doing this? Why do I feel like this assignment is important? How does completing this particular assignment support your learning and prepare you to be a practitioner in the field for whatever you hope to be post-graduation? We can accomplish this intrinsic motivation by incorporating student creativity and interest whenever possible. I understand that's really difficult, especially in some of these large lecture courses where we have multiple sections of the same course and we all have to be on the same page. But there's little ways you can sneak that in, and you can actually use AI to figure out clever ways to do that. If you can add metacognitive opportunities for students to really reflect on that learning, that will also help with the motivation. And if we can do things to discourage the cognitive offloading that encourages students to find ways to short circuit or circumvent the intentions of the assignment, meaning they're outsourcing their thinking to whatever the cool tool is today. I think that is super important because students have always found reasons to cognitively offload assessments, either due to time constraints or overwhelm or failing to see the value of the assignment. We just have one more tool that they can use to do that cognitive offloading or cheating in this day and age. And then anytime you can connect this to real world applications. Why is this relevant? Why are we learning this? How is this going to benefit me in my life, in my profession? I think those are all important ways to foster that intrinsic motivation. We also most certainly, and this is why we're here today, want to set clear policies and manage expectations. That includes expectations in AI education, going back and defining key terms in the context of AI tools, and always sharing examples of appropriate and inappropriate AI use. I think a lot of times students use AI inappropriately because they're not sure if it's a good use of it. So they're exploring just like we are. So Dan, can you tell us about setting clear expectations and providing AI education to our students?
Absolutely. So we talked about policies and guidelines, and now let's talk about how to effectively implement them. I mean, the syllabus is your first foundation. It's told students that they're not allowed to use calculators or proper citation requirements in class. And I really feel like the syllabus is that core, is that foundation. But those policies listed in the syllabus aren't enough. We need to actively discuss AI in our classrooms. And it's not just a one-time conversation. It's going to be an ongoing conversation. You may even want to consider dedicating parts of your class to learning about ChatGPT or Claude. We can see ways in which it can impress and be amazing, but also ways in which it shows its true limitations. And it does. So I think what it does, it helps to demystify AI doing this in class. It's not some mysterious black box like the monolith in 2001. We just have to play around with it a little bit. And of course, critical evaluation skills are crucial. Our students need to understand that AI can be confidently wrong. It seems so believable, but it's not at times. So this is an opportunity to teach them to fact check AI generated content. Also to recognize potential biases in the AI output, which it is replete with biases. Every platform, based upon its training method, its output is going to be biased in some form or fashion, and students need to be aware of that. To question outputs rather than just accepting them at face value, I think is another key part of living in 2024. I think that's a good skill to develop. So this might involve comparing AI responses to peer-reviewed sources or analyzing AI-generated text for errors or biases. Reflection, I think, is another powerful tool. We may want to consider like short reflection exercises, flash reflections, as I like to put it, where students document their AI use. Questions like, how did AI help your learning process? Or what limitations did you encounter? It can provide valuable insights into student learning while also encouraging and reinforcing metacognition. And then also finally, we need to model AI ethical use ourselves. We need to show our students how it can enhance research, streamline administrative tasks, but while still maintaining academic integrity at the core of your actions. So when students see us using AI thoughtfully and ethically, they're more likely to follow suit. Our goal shouldn't be to police, but to help students become informed, ethical users of these powerful tools. And then after the informing process, then we can choose to police just a little bit. Now, there's also 3 terms in the realm of this world of academic integrity and AI, AI squared: cheating, plagiarism, over-reliance. We need to think about the definition of these terms in the face of AI, in this age of AI. So we start with cheating. Traditional definition focuses on dishonest acts to gain unfair advantage. But what constitutes dishonest use of AI? If a student uses ChatGPT to help brainstorm ideas but write the paper themselves, is that cheating? What if they use it to check their grammar with Grammarly or some other embedded bot in a lot of browsers? And these are the kinds of discussions we need to have with our students and within our departments. I mean, I think a number of search engines now have an automatic AI distiller that gives you a brief summation of the search. That certainly would impact one's outlook too, whether they mean to or not. So plagiarism has always been about proper attribution of ideas and works, but AI complicates that. When a student uses AI, whose work are they actually using? The AI's, the training data, the company that created the AI? Again, this raises a plethora of questions that we all need to figure out. So many institutions are requiring AI disclosure statements, where you talk about how in the process of your research and writing, you fully disclose what AI platforms and methodology you use. Similar to how we require people to list a bibliography on their reports. Then there's over-reliance, which I think is the biggest problem. It's subtle, but it's the biggest problem. It's not necessarily cheating or plagiarism, and it's not necessarily academic dishonesty. It's about students potentially stunning their own learning by outsourcing higher order thinking, critical thinking skills to the AI tools that are available. I mean, think of it like using a calculator for basic arithmetic. Calculators are awesome tools. They help us out so much, but over-relying on them can sometimes cause us to not understand some of the more fundamental concepts in those mathematical thinking skills. So the key here is these definitions aren't just academic. They have real applications for how we design assignments, how we assess learning, and how we prepare students for their future careers. As we move forward, we'll need to constantly look at this and think about it and revise these definitions as AI technology continues to grow and evolve.
And you make a really good point, Dan, with the over-reliance, because we're seeing students use AI to generate their in-class introduction or to try to answer discussion board posts. They're using them on these really low-stakes assessments where, oh my gosh, it would be quicker for you to just write it yourself by the time you wrestle with the AI and try to get a suitable response. And I think, to your point, Dan, just like with the calculator, we've got to really get our students to embrace the fact that they need to master some of these foundational skills, these critical skills, this underlying knowledge base that they need to have so they can retrieve it quickly when they are doing these higher order processes. It reminds me of memorizing your multiplication tables in like second or third grade. Back in the 80s, I did this because if we made it through our times 12 tables, then we got a Coca-Cola in a glass bottle. And I waited till the absolute last day I could do it because I had so much social anxiety and lack of confidence. But now that I have those skills, I can multiply in my head, I can divide in my head, and I don't have to spend the cognitive load going, I don't remember that, and plugging into my calculator. That cognitive load can now be allocated to the higher order thinking that is available. And so using that same analogy, we need to teach our students that they don't want to over-rely on this tool. They've got to be able to think on their feet. To me, it reminds me of nursing students being able to do dosage calculations in their head rather than always having to run to an AI and say, how do I calculate this dose of epinephrine? My patient's having an anaphylactic reaction. not acceptable. So once we sit with these definitions and think about, what do they mean in the context of AI tools, such as plagiarism? Are you plagiarizing if you take the output from an AI and claim it as your own? The AI is not a someone. It's a something, but also would that output even exist if you had not prompted it into creation? So we need to sit with these definitions. We need to get clear in our own minds. What do these definitions mean to us today in the context of AI tools? And then we need to confidently communicate these definitions to our students so that we're all on the same page. Language matters. We see this most poignantly in this news article from NBC News reported just last month, almost 4 weeks ago now. A student decided to use AI to research and create an outline for a history essay. He did this at a time prior to it being clear that the school had an AI policy in place, or if they had the AI policy in place, it hadn't been adequately communicated to the student body. He then got busted for cheating, and as a result, it caused a lot of fear and a lot of anxiety, and this has gone on his academic record. And now future scholarships for his college career are at risk because he has this big cheating mark on his record. But beyond all of that, that's a big issue in and of itself. Notice that the headline is cheating, but the family attorney says plagiarism. All right, so which is it? Is it a little of both? Is it one? Is it the other? We need to be very, very careful here with our language.
So, a common misconception, how AI actually works. As with, I think, emergent and new technologies, sometimes we're a bit mystified at the whole process. And sometimes it's a lot of smoke and mirrors wrapped in a nice package. But AI works pretty neat in a neat way. I used to think initially that you would feed Frankenstein into the AI and that you would feed Beowulf into the AI, and it would have every single page stored of that book ready to be studied. But that's not how it works. I would think of it like a chef who's read thousands of cookbooks. And the chef doesn't necessarily memorize each recipe word for word. Instead, they learn patterns, like what ingredients work well together, what techniques produce certain results, how different cuisines are structured. So when this chef who's read thousands of cookbooks creates a new dish, it's influenced by everything it's learned, but it's not a direct copy of any single one recipe. So AI models like ChatGPT, they don't store a database of all the text they've been trained on. Instead, they store what they call weights, mathematical patterns that represent their learning about language, concepts, relationships. So when they generate text, they use these patterns to create new content that may be similar in style or structure to their training data. But again, it's not a direct copy. So this is why when you ask an AI to write something, you get different results each time. It's generating new text based on patterns it learned. It's not pulling from a database of pre-written content.
And
so
it
this
is
has it.
possible, and it is possible too, Dan, that if it has seen a certain text repeated thousands of times in its training data set, that if you start the stub of a sentence, such as fourscore and 7 years ago, that it may repeat that word for word, because as a statistical text predictor, it wants to give you the average or what is most likely to be the most likely way to complete that sentence. And so sometimes whenever it's a popular text that is heavily weighted, it may seem like plagiarism, but for the most part, it is only storing those weights. It's a symptom of the statistical text prediction that sometimes makes it look word for word.
I mean, it's definitely not traditional plagiarism because it's not copying existing text, but I do think it requires still proper attribution, and we need to figure out thoughtful guidelines for how we choose to use it. So we can shift this focus from, is this copied, to is this the student's own intellectual work? Understanding this could help us create more effective policies.
And then we have to concern ourselves with, is this really cheating? Or have our students found a novel or more clever path to completing an assignment that maybe we predicted? I think we need to give students a lot of credit. We may design an assignment, and I know personally, I get so deep into the assignment, I'm like, oh man, this is perfect. This is a work of art. This assignment's going to stand the test of time for at least 2 semesters. And then I'll have one of these really bright students come along and go, you could have done it that way and saved like 5 hours of work. Yes, thank you for pointing that out. I appreciate that. And so I tend to give students the benefit of the doubt, because unless we catastrophize all the ways our students are likely to execute an assignment, and then we build in those educational guardrails to make sure that we funnel them down the right chute to achieve the student learning outcomes we have in mind, then the cheating may be unintentional. And again, I think that's true because this technology is so novel that we're trying to figure it out just as quickly as they are.
Now, time for another poll. This poll is regarding plagiarism and AI detector usage, which we'll be interested to see. So this first question, developing effective GenAI policies, which best describes your institutional policy on plagiarism detectors? So do you have a clear established policy? Do you have an established policy even? And a couple more choices there. Also, which best explains your knowledge of how AI detectors work?
Once we finish this poll and discuss the results, Andy has asked some very provocative questions, so I want to discuss those before we proceed. I should also note that the first and the third questions, I used to only say we have a clear established policy, and I caught a lot of flack for that. So I did add option B, we have an established policy. So if you're wondering why that seems like a duplication, that was intentional. All right. We've got about 68% participation. All right, we are at 75%. So it'll give us just a few more seconds. Closing the poll in 3, 2, and 1. Y'all can probably tell I used to use clickers in my classes because I wanted to always make sure I was closing the poll with giving students enough time. Okay, so which best describes your institutional policy on plagiarism detectors? Okay, note that plagiarism detectors are different than AI detectors. They may be housed by the same program, such as Turnitin, but those are 2 distinct operations. And so 18% for we have a clear established policy and we have an established policy. 26% we have a policy that is in development or currently under review. And 38% we do not have any policies in place, or we rely on faculty discretion for their use. Okay, seems completely reasonable. All right, now the next question, which I think is really important, because I think once faculty understand how AI detectors work, they become a little more skeptical of them. 15%, I have a thorough understanding of how they function. Great, I want to hear from you in the next couple slides. I have a general understanding at 44%. That's good enough. I have heard of AI detectors, but know very little about how they work. Fair, I'm glad you're here. And I'm not familiar with AI detectors at all. Okay, we can fix that. And then which best describes your institutional policy on AI detectors, not plagiarism detectors? 3 of you have a clear established policy. I'm fascinated. I'd love to hear about that. 1 person has an established policy. 35% have a policy that's in development or currently under review. And 53%, which I think this reflects the vast majority of faculty that I interact with on other campuses. We do not have policies in place and or we rely on faculty discretion for their use. I think we're seeing that because I think the widespread adoption event really hit campuses just this fall. And people are really needing to grapple with what is AI, how does it work, how do we deal with it? And so I think if we were to rerun this poll in a year, we would see a lot more leaning towards we have a policy in development or we have an established policy. All right. So let's see. Andy asked about the someone versus something in the near future, these GenAI becoming agents. And then she clarified, in other words, how likely is it that generative AI will evolve from being a tool into becoming an autonomous agent capable of acting independently in the near future? Would, in that case, being addressed as someone. All right, so the goalpost for artificial general intelligence or these autonomous agents that are able to function independently, I think it keeps moving because we're having trouble truly deciding what test can we use to say that we have developed AGI. Is the Turing test adequate to say we have developed AGI if a computer can pass the Turing test? I would argue not, because we have artificial intelligence systems that have been able to pass the Turing test for a couple of years now. Is it the Chinese room? Is it the Wozniak coffee test? I mean, there's lots of different metrics we can use to say, have we achieved artificial general intelligence? And for those of you that haven't heard the Wozniak coffee test, I think it's the best test of have we achieved AGI, because Steve Wozniak of Apple fame said that unless an AI or an autonomous being in a robot can go into a stranger's house and figure out how to make coffee, then they have not achieved artificial general intelligence and refinement. And so I think until we can figure out how to truly quantify this, it's hard to say, have we achieved AGI? I think that because we anthropomorphize those things that we interact with that seem human, I think we will address them as someones rather than some things. So yeah, that is a fantastic discussion that I'd love to continue having. The great and powerful Woz. Yes, David, that's correct. All right, well, thank you all for participating in that poll. And I have added that to our digital swag bag. So if you want to have these conversations with others at your own institution, you do have these questions available. Feel free to use them or modify them to suit your purposes. All right. So
So,
go ahead, Dan.
is it my turn?
No, this is my stuff.
Oh, okay. That's what I thought. Never mind.
All good. So I'm going to give Dan some grief because I love to talk about this part, because Dan talked about Ethan Mollick's co-intelligence quote, talking about the training data and the weights. And this is proof that if the AI sees something so many times that when it sees it again, it says, well, the novelty or the perplexity of that is so low, it must have been AI generated. Okay, so yeah, according to AI detectors, Genesis from the Bible was written by AI, and that's because the language is not surprising based on what it's seen. So anytime we employ an AI detector, there's a few different ways that they measure the amount of AI generated content, and they don't do it well because two of the metrics they're using are perplexity. How surprising is this language based on what I've seen? All right, so also the Declaration of Independence. It's seen it so many times that, yeah, that too was obviously AI generated. But then it also looks at burstiness. Burstiness is the frequency with which words or groups of words are repeated. And so if we have high burstiness in a text, such as cats are popular pets, cats are often kept in homes, many people love cats, cats are affectionate, cats, cats, cats. Oh my, okay. This sounds like second grade. We just learned the word cat, hat, sat, and mat. But if we make this low burstiness is characteristic of more sophisticated writing. And so if we modify this, so cats are popular pets known for their playful nature, and instead of saying cats, we use they. Low burstiness is less likely to be flagged as AI output. And so this presents a problem because, you want to carry this one, Dan?
Yeah, absolutely. So the AI detection tools, I think, using them brings up a good point of equity and fairness. And I think it's understandable how many institutions are rushing to adopt AI detection software, but right now they're far from perfect. They're producing a lot of false positives. There's a lot of different checkers out there. We don't really know how they were created, in what way. A lot of them aren't very, ones that I've noticed that are used in student conduct that instructors use. Sometimes, how do we even know to trust this specific checker? But they are producing a number of false positives and flagging. I have seen where flags human written work as AI generated. And there are reasons why these checkers could say, hey, this is AI generated. The false positives really impact a huge chunk of our more vulnerable students too. Like, for instance, international students. A detector can flag a writing by English as a second language individual just because the writing style differs from standard American English patterns. Or even a student, think about a student that has dyslexia and is using some type of assistive technology to help with writing. I mean, this work could be flagged because it shows unusual patterns of revision and correction. And we're even seeing students from those non-native English speakers from certain linguistic backgrounds being unfairly targeted. I think it adds a lot of anxiety and a barrier for many students. It can become quite an anxiety-ridden prospect for fear of getting caught cheating, even when the student is not being dishonest. And it's pretty easy to circumvent these tools now. I mean, there are browser add-ons, there are other AI platforms where you feed a writing in and it makes a more realistic, the output is a more realistic report that will circumvent those checkers. So it does raise a crucial question. Are we creating more problems than we're solving with these detection tools? I think it becomes like, gotcha. And I don't know that that's necessarily good. We're not in the business of just catching students and willy-nilly punishing them. This should be a learning process. So maybe we should focus on designing assignments that make AI use irrelevant or transparent. Our main goal is to promote learning, not to create a technological arms race between us and our students.
All right, so towards that end, one of the guidelines that I have suggested for adoption is a syllabus statement on AI detector use. We are in the process of transitioning away from Blackboard to Canvas as our learning management system, and Turnitin does come with both a plagiarism and an AI detector. And until those AI detectors become better at what they claim to do, and we have a much lower false positive rate, I've asked that our AI detector be turned off. Now, that does not prevent my faculty to going to outside AI detectors and using those. And they do, and I try to have these thoughtful conversations with them about why AI detectors are not great. So in the interest of fostering an environment of student trust and prioritizing the development of students' critical thinking, we developed this syllabus statement, which I have included in the digital swag bag for your review later.
Now, let's explore some signs that students have been using AI, and you may well encounter this in your courses, if not already, which I'm sure you have. I mean, faculty, the first thing is something's off, but you can't quite put your finger on it. So we need to make these telltale signs more concrete. First things first, we need to watch for sudden changes in a student's engagement patterns, like in low stakes assignments, like discussion boards. If an informal writer, like who normally submits informal writing, submits a polished discussion board post, that's certainly suspect. Or if a student struggles with writing, suddenly, who has been struggling with writing, suddenly produces a flawless, beautiful written work, that's also worth noting. There have been times where a student's discussion posts shift from personal, if grammatically imperfect, reflections to sophisticated but detached analyses. A clear shift in voice and engagement. It just doesn't match. Another red flag is when students can't explain their own work. So I think it is important that we focus more on the work process. Like, tell me how you got here. Tell me how you figured this out. How did you get to this point? A student submits an essay or an analysis in a class discussion, but they can't really elaborate on the key points or explain their reasoning. It's like having the answer without understanding the path to get there. So certainly a disconnect between work and verbal explanation oftentimes will signal some type of AI involvement. And then the depth of understanding that a student has with a specific subject. I mean, AI creates this, it's confident in what it's saying, but it's all superficial. And it sounds good at first, but it lacks any kind of deep, real engagement with the course concepts that you're covering. An essay might use all the right terminology, but fail to make meaningful connections to the subject or the discussions. So watching for relevance and specificity. AI can tend to be broad and general. So we need to look for those nuances in our assignments, if those missing nuances. And if a student's work feels like it could have been written for any class, that's definitely a warning sign. So we're looking at all of these warning signs, all these different points that help to create a fuller picture. Also look for responses that don't quite answer the question. And there's a matter of personal voice. Student writing has personality, quirks. We learn about their foibles, their personality. I think, and we need to make sure to always ensure that personality shows through, because I think when personality disappears suddenly, or we switch to overly formal language, it's worth noting, and certainly send up a red flag. It's like recognizing a friend's voice on the phone, but it's not their voice, it's somebody else. You know something sounds off. No one sign proves AI use, but it can help us identify when we need to have those productive conversations with students.
Yeah, I think all of those make our spidey sense tingle, and we know that something is just not right. And so based on that, I think it's important to start with that conversation, which brings us to our third key strategy, promoting transparency and dialogue. And as I mentioned earlier, it starts with that basis of engaged pedagogy and building on that, communicating your rationale behind AI policies, not just because I said so, but this is how my policy is supporting student learning in my classroom. So let's go ahead and jump into engaged pedagogy.
Engaged pedagogy, bell hooks, one of the most famous Kentuckian feminist, sociologist, philosopher. But when we think of AI in education here at EKU, let's ground our approach in our core institutional values like intellectual vitality, cultural competency, and a sense of community. We are a school of opportunity, and we need to remain so while maintaining a high level of academic excellence. For our kernels here at EKU, this means moving beyond simple questions of can I use AI to reflecting on questions more, how does AI impact my learning journey at EKU? We want our students to critically examine not just what AI produces, but how it aligns with our institutional commitment to excellence through integrity. And bell hooks, the way that she explained that, we really need to get down to the basics of our relationships with our students. And first things first, I think everybody's equal in this classroom. That's one of the first things that bell hooks push for. A teacher as a facilitator. The teacher isn't at a higher point in status, class, or anything with the students, because the students have their own wealth of experiences and knowledge that they bring to the class. While the teacher as facilitator, while the teacher may have had a good deal of education in certain subjects, far more than the student, they are on an equal playing field with the student. Student-centered learning. We need to recognize their diverse experiences and really focus on their experiences and get them to share their experiences. Because when a student shares their experiences, they make it a part of the classroom, and it does increase engagement. It makes them actively involved in their education. I mean, at the core of this too, engaging critical thinking. Students need to question every aspect, power structures, societal norms, the existing power structures. That is engaged pedagogy. Look at every aspect of the situation, question the validity of it. Who does this help? Who does it hinder? Empowerment and agency. We want students to take ownership of their own learning. Again, when they are engaged actively in their own studies, they are more engaged in the classroom and more engaged in their learning and less likely to over-rely on AI. We also need to build a supportive and inclusive learning environment in the way that we talk with students, learning to get away from the accusatory gotcha moments. I think that we typically might have had when it comes to academic dishonesty, but try to open a dialogue, understanding why they made the decisions that they did, how they got there is far more important.
Fantastic. So with that in mind, I think it's important to really emphasize the rationale behind the policies. And so I won't read these verbatim. They are included in your resource guide, but we can take three stances. We can say AI is forbidden. This policy is in place to ensure that the work submitted is authentically yours and reflects your personal understanding and capabilities. I love keeping that positive and empowering tone. We can say AI is allowed for certain assignments. This approach allows you to explore the capabilities of AI tools under controlled conditions while ensuring that student learning outcomes are met. So this is another guideline that I have offered my faculty here at EKU. And AI is allowed on almost every assignment. This policy aims to foster an environment of innovation and adaptation, aligning with the evolving landscape of technology and education. Obviously, we're still going to have some closed book exams, but I think this is incredibly empowering and exciting. And I hope students feel the same way. We also want to be very careful to document our AI utilization, and I offer 4 methods for doing so, also included in your digital swag bag. The personal reflection is probably the lowest energy way to accomplish this. And so anything that's highlighted in yellow, I have offered this in our syllabus template for faculty to take as a guideline and implement as a policy in their classroom. And the yellow parts are where they need to add in the details. And so with the personal reflection, write 200 to 500 words, including the purpose, the rationale, process, integration, evaluation of AI contributions. Did this help? Did this hinder? Did you verify that everything is accurate? What was this impact on your learning? So did this influence your understanding in a positive or a negative way? I think the most powerful piece, though, and the piece I like the most, is the affirmation statement that I have included in every documentation method. And this affirmation statement requires students to say, I affirm that I have taken all necessary steps to ensure the originality and accuracy of the material and data used in this assignment. And I certify that this work represents my own creativity and critical thinking, which is the goal, and it's adhering to our academic integrity policies. All right. The next one is a boilerplate statement. I think this one personally is my favorite. It might be because I'm a logical scientist, I'm a chemist by training, and so this one to me checks all the boxes because students acknowledge they've used a tool, they have to specify the tool, they say the tool was used in the following ways, and they have to provide a detailed explanation of uses, steps taken to refine the outputs, describe how they verify the accuracy, and describe how you cited or attributed any AI-generated material in accordance with the academic standards, followed again by that affirmation statement. And so this boilerplate statement would be best used by placing it in the syllabus so you can have that conversation with students on day one. And then that boilerplate statement should be repeated either at the beginning or the end of every assignment where artificial intelligence tools have been used. Another very rigorous method, and I think this one is probably only best for places where we're really trying to put AI through the paces and examine its capabilities, is the prompt appendix. So I can imagine if you're having a serious back and forth trying to create something with the AI, either of a linguistic or artistic nature, or if you're working with AI on computer programming, this one would probably be appropriate. And so you would write a list of prompts and queries. You would include the AI responses, brief explanations of how each AI generated response was modified before incorporating it into your work. And again, including that affirmation statements and making sure that it's well organized and clearly labeled so that, it's not a nightmare to grade. A fourth method that is an emerging field are some of these discipline-specific documentation guidelines. So there are certain organizations that are requiring specific citation formats, specifically the APA, and APA has specific guidelines on citing ChatGPT in particular. The MLA has recommendations, the Chicago Manual of Style, but also we can include what ethical considerations or norms do we need to consider in our field? If you are a nursing student or if you're in occupational or physical therapy, what ethical considerations do you have to use before using AI tools in your casework or your anything that might be dealing with patients and confidentiality? What are your use limitations that are discipline specific? And I like this last one, consultation requirements. Students are encouraged to seek guidance from their instructor when in doubt about acceptable AI use. Again, keeping that safety net in place and letting students know that if they're confused or unsure, they've got that open communication line with their instructor to make sure that they're on the right path. So all of these guidelines are included. Feel free to use or modify to suit your purposes. So Dan, what are the key elements of effective policies from what you've seen? Oh, you're muted.
Sorry.
All good.
Okay, so we should think of this as our policy blueprint. Each element builds on the others to create a structure that guides us and protects our students. Clarity, this is our foundation. We need to be very clear. Can I use AI with absolutely no ambiguity? Vague statements, no good. Use AI appropriately. That leaves far too much room for interpretation. So we have to be very explicit in what we tell our students. Secondly, the specificity builds on clarity by adding crucial details. If you allow AI use, name the tools that are acceptable for your class. I believe that pointing out a list of acceptable tools will head off any problems later when a student might claim, I thought this tool was okay. So be clear about what tools they're permitted to use in class. And then consequences. Again, as I said earlier, this isn't about being punitive, it's about transparency. We're working at a school, we're trying to teach the emergent generation about new technology and proper work practices. So it's not about being punitive. we're being transparent and we're teaching the students. They need to understand what is at stake. We link our AI class policy directly to the institution's academic integrity policy. Simple as that. We be clear about the process too. You explain to the students, like, well, a first violation might typically result in a mandatory revision of the assignment. Students need to know what kind of trouble they could get into, what kind of sanctions could be applied to them if found responsible of academic dishonesty. Of course, second violation, then the student should know that a second violation or a violation after the first official warning may result in a stiffer sanction. Being clear about what could potentially happen with the students it is helpful. And it helps them weigh the risks before making the choices. If you set out the rules, it's their choice if they wish to breach those rules. And then education is what transforms your policy from a list of rules into a teaching tool. Explain the why behind your policy choices. Help students understand about why it's important to properly attribute AI, and that it's not just about following the rules. It's about academic honesty and developing their own voice and expertise. These elements all work together: clear rules, specific guidelines, understood consequences, and educational context. These create a framework that supports student success, and they turn your policy into something that just sits in your syllabus, into a tool that actively shapes student behavior and learning within the classroom.
All right, we've only got about 3 minutes left, so I do want to skip ahead to hit the highlights on our last couple of slides here. Two things that I'm working on in the spring semester are institutional policies that I hope our faculty will consider adopting. Our faculty senate actually approached me about exploring which types of assessments our AI technologies are currently capable of grading. And so that will become an institutional policy. And again, no AI detector use until the tech improves. And we know that every single week, it seems like AI serves up a new miracle or a new concerning development. And so what many of you may not have heard of recently, there are these new so-called invisible tools, invisible because they're invisible to instructors. And for those of you that work within the Canvas LMS, you will recognize this little screenshot here. There are currently AI tools that students can pay for that integrate with every LMS in every browser that I have seen. There is not a single LMS that is immune to this, but students can pay a small monthly fee and the artificial intelligence will answer all of their quizzes in the LMS without detection by faculty. And I point this out not to depress you and have you throw up your hands and say, well, this is hopeless, but to just go back and to reinforce the fact that if we come from this approach of engaged pedagogy and fostering a supportive and resource-rich environment, students are going to be less likely to engage in this academic dishonesty. And so, Dan, if you wanted to clear us out on this.
Oh yeah, I was just saying it's about fostering a collaborative environment. It's not about setting up a defense net in your class and creating all sorts of rules and detecting violations. It's supporting your students through a learning journey, and really thinking about, instead of, oh, they're being dishonest using this, maybe we might think why they turned to AI in this moment when we didn't want them to. Why? Do they not feel engaged with the coursework? Do they not feel challenged with it? Is it not applicable to their experience? Do they feel that they're not served by it? And when they feel, yeah.
Those are all very good points, Dan. And we are at top of the hour. So I just want to thank you all again for joining us. We know your time is precious, and the fact that you chose to spend 60 minutes with us learning about generative AI capabilities and effective course policy implementation means a ton to us. The slides are available in the digital swag bag, and I will download the video and send out a link to that recording later this afternoon. So thanks again for joining us, and we hope to see you in February when the Spark Talks resume.